to all of us. First of all, let's say thanks to God who has been giving us mercy, guidance, happiness, and health, so we can attend and participate in this event without any obstacles. Our honorable speakers and all participants, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your enthusiasm to participate. My name is Anissa Chimarijani from Statistic Department, batch 55, and I'm the moderator of today's FGD. I'm very pleased to see you here and welcome of you to this FGD. Next, I would like to read today's agenda. This FGD is divided into four sessions. First is opening, presentation, discussion, and closing. For today FGD, we are going to discuss about gender equality. But before the presentation begins, may I introduce you our speakers this evening. Our first speaker is Ardela Maharani. She is president of IPB Debating Community in 2019. She is chosen to be one of delegation of IPB University for WUDC in Thailand 2020. And in the same year, she is awarded the second most outstanding student award of IPB University. And okay, and our second speaker, Imam Nuryaman Karta K. He is vice president in IPB debating community. You can see on the screen there is more achievement that Ardela Maharani received. And also you can see the achievement that Kak Imam received. Okay, without further ado, I would like to give the time to our first speaker for presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to Kak Ardela. Time is yours. Ada di sini. Berarti aku ada. Ya udah, gue ngelewat doang di. Nita, Nita. Oh jadi kan.
Hello, everyone. Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, everyone. Before we start, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ardela Maharani. I am here representing IPB debating community in sharing with all of you some stuff that I know about gender equality. So today there will be me and Imam from IPB debating community, and we will both discuss this in depth, hopefully. And if any of you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask us. All right, without further ado, let's start. So today we're going to discuss SDGs number 5, specifically about gender equality. Maybe some of you have heard what this SDG is, but maybe most of you do not know what is really the problem around why is there this SDGs and how to really how to really take steps to work together in trying to achieve this SDG. So we're going to discuss a few things today. I will discuss four things. First is the origins of gender inequality, and second is a few gender stereotypes that we've probably heard before, and third, maybe some current conditions that are going on with the issues of gender, and number four is what this COVID-19 have to do with the progress of gender equality. Right, let's start. So, the origins of gender inequality actually begins from something called patriarchy. Um, for those of you who don't know, patriarchy is a condition, a social condition, a social system where men hold the primary power. Like they are mostly dominant in lots of areas in our everyday lives, including political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property. So if we see our day-to-day lives, we can see like lots of men are actually in charge of governments. Men are also in charge in companies, and they're very much making most of the decisions in our everyday life, whether we realize it or not. And actually, this condition is patriarchy. Um, it's where these men hold most power, and they either use it for good or most of the times not so good. So we're going to discuss that today. So actually, the origins of gender equality inequality was because of this patriarchy. But the question is, where did this patriarchy come from? So the origins of patriarchy, like most things, are actually historical accidents. So they don't like humans don't suddenly come up of the blue and say, "Hey, this is patriarchy." But humans have patriarchy by accident. It's not something that's intended. So it began when back then during the caveman era, where they had like the hunter gatherers people. And they had division of jobs among men and women. So men were the one who did the hunting, while women were told to take care of their homes. Eventually, this translated to our daily lives as where men being the breadwinners, the ones who go to work and look for money and provide for the family, while women are subjected to domestic jobs in the household. So it's actually by accident that we have this sort of patriarchy throughout historical events, which is the division of jobs among hunter gatherers, and it's pretty nowadays. It's very common in most households where men are the breadwinners and women are usually the ones staying at home and cooking, taking care of the children, and taking care of the house. So that is actually a form of patriarchy. So now we're going to move on about the stereotypes in our society. Maybe most of you have heard this or even you've experienced this. So stereotypes in society are where we have certain expectations towards a specific gender. Specifically, we're talking about women here. So there are lots of stereotypes towards women. The most common one, there's so many, but we're going to discuss maybe just four of the most common ones. The first one is where women are stereotypically part or subjected to domestic jobs in households. They become housewives, and many people think that the end goal of every woman is being a housewife, when that may not necessarily be the case. But because of that stereotype where women are supposed to be housewives, um, it becomes it becomes a stereotype where uh, women receiving higher education becomes unnecessary. They see like, pardon me, in Indonesian would be, cewek ngapain belajar tinggi-tinggi toh nanti jadi ibu rumah tangga. Like those are very common phrases that are being said to women across the world because they feel that women has nothing to do but being in the household. Though there's nothing wrong with that, the problem is that when women are subjected to domestic jobs because of being forced by people around her, it's okay if she wants to be a housewife because she genuinely cares for her family and does it with full consent. But the problem is most of the times women become housewives because people around them are becoming housewives. Their families are forcing them to be housewives, whether they realize it or not. So that's something of an issue here. It's not, women should be given the right to pursue anything that she wants in her career. She shouldn't be forced to do anything that she doesn't want to. So this includes domestic jobs. Second, second stereotype is how women are expected to fulfill beauty standards. I think this, we can see this in a lot of cultures. For example, in Korean beauty, for example, they usually have very fair skin, very dewy like skin, and very flawless skin. Or maybe in most Western countries, they have to have lots of heavy makeup usually, and every woman is expected to act feminine in a way. And all of these beauty standards are actually determined by the beauty industries, are actually determined by people around them deciding what's beautiful or not, when in reality, I think we all agree that beauty is something that is subjective. Everyone is beautiful inside and out, and women shouldn't be subjected to beauty standards and shouldn't have to follow that. These are the stereotypes that women are somehow expected to follow. That usually the most beautiful women are, either thin or curvy or tall. So there are so many stereotypes out there of what a beautiful woman may be, but that those are actually stereotypes. All women are beautiful in their own way at the end of the day, and that's something we should understand. So the third stereotype is women being emotional and weak. Though maybe some of you think this is true, but it's hard to deny that we humans, every human is subjected to different type of feelings. It doesn't matter. Every human has the right to feel sad, to feel angry, to feel happy in whatever forms necessary, and it's very normal for us to be inflicted on making decisions because of our emotional state. But most women, most people in general, can be rational in many things. Um, actually, uh, it's not very, it's not only specific to women. I think there's something called toxic masculinity, where men are expected to be macho, where men are expected to not cry. This example is parallel to what women are stereotyped to be, that they are going to cry a lot, that they are weak. Meanwhile, we can see examples in daily life where strong women, like single mothers, are capable of raising a household on their own. Women leaders who are capable in creating decisions. For example, like Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. She's a mother and a leader, but she's still strong and rational at the same time. And I think that's pretty normal in day-to-day life. Maybe we subconsciously put this stereotype in our mind, but it's actually generalizing what women are. So number 4 is a stereotype where there are some jobs that are meant to be female. For example, subconsciously we may think, oh, that person is a nurse, it must be a woman, or a teacher, or a secretary. How many of you in your organizations have male secretaries? I'm pretty sure most of your secretaries are women, including myself. So those are stereotypically female jobs, where people think that women can't be pilots or women can't be engineers, and vice versa. Why can't men be nurses, teachers, or secretaries? Everyone has their own specific set of skills, and they are not determined by their own genders. There are many studies showing that there's no impact on gender whatsoever to the capability of a woman nor a man doing a certain job. So why shouldn't we all be given the same opportunity to achieve any type of job that we want? Now the problems is that every single problem with gender equality is actually a structural issue. Every single layer of society, let it be government, companies, communities, or even individuals, uh, co- contribute to how bad the problem is. Let's start at the top. at the government. So if we see at the top how every law in our day-to-day life is, and every single aspect of our life is our like history or philosophy, they are created by men for the benefit of men. For example, we have like in Saudi Arabia, we have jobs, we have driving and job restrictions in Saudi Arabia, and that is created by men, restricting the movement of women. Though some might argue otherwise, but regardless, laws are created by men anyway. They most of the time, people in power do not really think of those not in power. They tend to abuse those powers. We can also see that in government there's very lack of representation of women. So that's a problem actually, because we need more representation in governments to actually more women representations in governments to actually think from a woman's point of view of what problems that we face and deal with it on a structural level with the law. And second layer is the companies. We can see how most companies, most CEOs and top managements are led by males. And sometimes it leads to abuse of power and a certain bias that women are incompetent, or because they eventually become housewives and they'll take more maternity leave, for example, they become unprofitable. Um, we can see an example of how Amazon back then they had an artificial intelligence software to hire new employees, but the AI somehow only hired male white employees. That's because in the data, the AI reads that most of the employees there were white males. Hence, that is restricting towards the bias that we have now. What we want is a diverse workplace with equal men and women and of different religions and different backgrounds. And we do not want a homogeneous society. So number three is community. We have certain cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, even in our society, on how it's normal to discriminate women. For example, during Kartini era, we had a very um, serious problem on how women are unable to get education. That is a cultural belief, even till now, where we limit women to pursue education just because they're going to be housewives. So that's some sort of a cultural belief. We also have issues every single day. If you're a woman, you probably have realized this, that you've been catcalled. For those of you who don't know, catcalled is men trying to flirt with you, let it be men you don't know, or people you work with, or people you study with, thinking that just because they are male, they can exercise their male dominance and flirt with you or act inappropriately towards you. After this, we're going to discuss several issues that has been viral throughout this past few years in regards to the cultures of society today. And finally, we have a problem with where individuals nowadays, sometimes they are unaware of how they are probably being discriminated as a woman, and maybe men do not realize that they are being discriminative towards women. Most of the times we just normalize these things because everyday society says to. For example, if someone catcalls you, and then if a guy catcalls a girl, and her friends just shrug it off and normalize it and say, hey, it's okay, that's what men do. But that's not what men are supposed to do. Everyone should respect each other's boundaries with consent. So it's a problem we have in society. Now, the current conditions in terms of data, we have several issues surrounding gender equality. Number one is we have a serious issue on gender pay gap, where women earn only 77 cents for every dollar that men get for the same work. Well, it's very unfair for men and women who are doing the same job, but women get paid less just because she's a woman. It's okay if perhaps they get paid less because they are incompetent, but not because of their genders. We have a serious issue, even until today, that's still an issue that gender equality is trying to solve. Number two is for every three women, one is suffering from violence. So 35% of women have experienced physical and or sexual violence, whether they realize it or not. So, and sadly, very few of these women actually report it to the police because most of the times they are afraid of those who are doing sexual violence towards them. They are afraid that they will lose anyway in court. So it's a very serious issue that we have today. Third issue is we have about 750 million women and girls who are alive today, and they were married before their 18th birthday. This is an issue because usually under 18 means you are also not an adult and you are not sustainable financially nor mentally. This is a problem for women who are being forced, girls who are being forced into marriages before their 18th birthday. It's happening across developing nations, and it's also another issue that gender equality is trying to solve. And the last issue we have is government representation. Like I've discussed before, we have only 24% of national parliamentarians who were women as of November 2018. It's like I said before, we need representation from women who understand women's problems, females' problems, and what is going on today. We need them to push laws that are gender equal for both genders and in consideration whatever issues both genders are facing. Now we're going to discuss something that's viral in the past few years. Number one is hashtag MeToo. For those of you who don't know, hashtag MeToo is a movement that surfaced because of a Hollywood producer. His name is Harvey Weinstein, and he committed various sexual harassments and sexual harassment cases to many actresses in Hollywood. And after so many years, one of his victims finally spoke up with the hashtag MeToo. And turns out that became viral, that hashtag, and many women, turns out, they could relate to this issue that, like, again, 1 out of 3 women have been sexually harassed in her life. So it becomes a movement where women across the globe are coming together and saying, hey, I've been sexually harassed too, hashtag me too. So this is a very viral movement back then, maybe till now, how they're trying to point out that the discrimination towards women and the inequality of power, the imbalance of power between men and women have been an issue. So these women who are suffering from sexual violence, sexual physical violence, are unable to speak up. And when they do speak up, they are lost against the male powers in the criminal justice system. So it's been a very debatable issue on what women should do in countering hashtag MeToo. And second is also another viral issue in regards to sexual harassment in a campus in Indonesia, Agni. I'm pretty sure most of you know. This is also the same thing. So when a woman speaks up against sexual violence or sexual harassment, what most males did was abuse their power, abuse their male dominance, and saying, if you're a student, saying that, okay, I will give you bad grades, okay, I will drop you out of university. Or if you're working in a company, they'll say, I will fire you. You have nothing but you, unless you listen to what I say. That is, these two issues are a serious gender issue, criticizing how women are very helpless against institutions that are dominated by men today. So it's something for us to think about. So finally, we're going to talk about COVID-19 impacts. Before COVID-19, it's very hard to achieve full gender equality. That remains and although fewer girls are forced into early marriage and more women are in leadership roles. For example, like just a couple of months ago, we had Kamala Harris being nominated for vice president. We have lots of women in leadership roles, and that's already progress. But because of COVID-19, the lockdowns, because women and girls are being are at home more, so they're increasing the risk of violence against them. So the cases of domestic violence, physical, sexual, and psychological abuse have increased by 30% in some countries. Other issues like in how to combat COVID-19, what we need is that we need women to be represented fairly in pandemic-related leadership roles. So in local governments, in national parliaments, we need to have more women representation so that they can touch on women issues in terms of the impacts of COVID-19, especially since women are on the front lines of fighting the coronavirus. Most health and social workers are female anyway, so why shouldn't we give them more rights and represent them in parliament in order to get in order to get equal gender rights for them? And last but not least, I'm pretty sure most our moms and our other other working moms are facing this, where they bear additional household burdens during the pandemic. Like our lecturers, who are women, they have to not only teach, but they also have to take care of the household. And that's a double burden that we need to decrease somehow, and using this SDGs gender equality. So that's it for my presentation. I apologize if it's too long or too complicated. Don't hesitate to ask me. Thank you, and see you in the discussion session. Thank you.
Oh my God. Okay. Wah, such an interesting presentation. Thank you so much for Kak Ardela. Okay, now we move to our second speaker. Please welcome to Kak Imam. Time is yours.
Hello, am I audible? Tes,
Yep, you're audible, Imam.
apakah
Ya,
suaraku terdengar?
Yep.
terdengar
Oke,
Kak.
thank you. Cool. Oke, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Imam. Now I'd like to explain about gender equality as to how it will achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. But I think Adela managed to explain the whole concepts of gender equality and also portraying a structural problem that still emerged up until now. So I'm not going into it. So my presentation consists of threefold. First of all, I think I'm going to talk about first status quo or a fact about gender equality, but I'm not going to deep dive into that because I think and we are quite well aware about that. I think that's enough said. Second of all, I'm going to talk about the framework in achieving gender equality. That is to say, how, for example, we have to understand the key features in addressing the problems, and second of all, for example, several school of thought that can be used as a framework of our effort. And last but not least, I'm going to talk about the unique approach in achieving gender equality in Indonesia that is consists of a variety of culture and also differences. And last but not least, this is very key important in this debate, in this speech, because I'm going to talk more about how, for example, the best practices and case study in achieving gender equality that already brought by a certain community or by certain policy that is inherently important for us to know deeper about how to really create other innovation, for example, or other movement in achieving this gender equality. So, well, first let's talk about the status quo. I think that other quite managed to explain about what happened in the status quo, so I'm not going to dive into it. So can you move and proceed to the next slide? So I'm going to talk about the framework in achieving gender equality now. And can you proceed to the next slide? I'm sorry. Okay. Apakah slide-nya udah berpindah? Oke, ke sebelumnya.
Sudah, Imam.
Cool. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the framework in achieving gender equality. I think that the key substantive for gender equality here is all about how actually use the concept empowerment as to how actually empower women to have more better bargaining power, for example, or even more fair share in terms of revenue gain or better perception in terms of the social perception, for example. But I think that these key concepts of empowerment is conscious of three things. First, we have to notice that we have to include social aspect in terms of empowerment process. That is to say, we have to make sure that women are able to have a strong decision making power in deciding about their livelihood or even or the participation in communities. They also involved in deciding and also creating a policy in their communities. But second of all, I think it is important as to how actually well aware about the gender and also social norm that is really happening as to how actually neutralize all of the narrative that really disenfranchise these women, for example, because of their actualization, because of the choices that they have, because of a certain amounts of inferiority that they assume by the existing social norm. So as to how we actually help women in having more better social capital and also more better power in terms of decision making processes. But second of all, I think it is important to look into the political spectrum or political element as to how, for example, women have more participation in political processes when they are being able to vote in election, for example, or even they are involved in public discourse or social discourse in deciding what a good policy is for the community or for the domestic needs and for all the livelihood that they actually want to work in. Or for example, we include women to participate to become a candidate in parliament, for example, or in any kind of position that can give them an access to more better and bargaining power for their life. But this is the last thing that is really important. We have to notice that the economic aspect in empowerment it has become the key here, because we have to notice that there's a lack of access of women to control the capital or even they are able to have a capital that is really important in doing their life, in actualizing order, and also in running their business, for example, or even as to how actually remove, for example, the bottleneck or the constraint for these women to enter the market or the businesses to run the economy and getting much better fair shares of wage, for example. I think these three key elements is really important as to how we actually empower women. But I think in order to understand about empowerment itself, I think that there are two kinds of perspective or approaches. Empowerment can be seen as process. That is to say, how we actually include women to participate in decision making, or as to how, for example, we help women to get better access to any other kinds of sources that can give them more better power, more better perception, more better resources for them. But also there are the two context is all about the outcome that we can get, the outcomes of this empowerment, as to how, for example, based on the empowerment that we create, based on the empowerment that we see, it can help these women, for example, to have more fair share of revenue gain, for example, or more fair share of educational access or vocational or training, and this is important for their life. And I think for the next step, United Nations already provide you a framework and also the guidance as to how we actually achieve the gender equality. They, there are conscious of several elements that we or several milestones that we can achieve, and this can become parameters and guidance for us in order to do something to help women, for example, or to achieve the gender equality. And this milestone is conscious for example, how to we end up the discrimination process and also how, for example, we end the violence and discrimination, we end the forced marriage, for example, or how we actually attract women to have more participation in leadership and decision making processes, or how, for example, women can get more better access to economic resources or financial services, or in terms of policy making process or legislation, or how, for example, the policy in itself really benefiting women and give a fair distributions of benefit place. I think those elements, those framework really important in order for us to create a solution to the gender equality problems. And I think the next step, we have to go dive about how we actually use this concept as a way for us to create a solution. Can you proceed to the next slide? I think there are several school of thought for us to understand and the problem in gender equality, for example. Bisa ke slide selanjutnya. So I use these kinds of school of thought based on certain sources coming from World Bank and also UNDP and also my own research. What is really happening, especially in rural areas, and this has also become my concern. Mungkin bisa ke slide selanjutnya. Sebelumnya, okay. Okay, first thing first, let's talk about the school of thought coming from the Gender Innovation Lab school. As to how we run business, I think there are few elements that we have to understand, that we have to comprehend. First, how to start their businesses or have more financial assistance, for example. They have to have a collateral as tools for them to gain those kinds of loan. But this collateral consists of asset, the asset of certification and other things in yours. But the problem is those certificate or all of this asset is already owned by men. That is to say, it makes women unable to have a good a starting point in running their business or even have more opportunity expanding their business because of the access for financial services. It is limited, and it's and in fact compared to men, for example, men have more better access to this capital as to how they can run a business, gain much more better uh, revenue for their life, and because of those imbalance of access and entry to the or as to how, for example, country or government see women as less significant than men because men can contribute more revenue for the government because they can more pay more tax for government, for example. For example, the policies that specifically empower women, it is hardly to get processed aside from the political dynamic inside the parliament, for example. We think that the contributions are coming from these women that is lesser than men, it's also become the main consideration as to how they seen as less significant in the first place. But second of all, we have to understand like the concept as to how women can get better rights, entrepreneur skill, better skill in order to do their business. As to how, for example, we help them with financial literacy, or women are able to comprehend data analysis, or they are able to have leadership skills that is really powerful, for example, or as to how it is enough said. But for example, we have seen that UNDP or United Nations already and also a blueprint as to how to achieve the gender equality. This consists of several things that we need to understand. First, for example, we have to remove the structural barriers to women economic empowerment, like what I already explained. Like, for example, the barriers to capital, the barriers to financial services, to prevent and also respond to the gender-based violence that is really rising now, and how to promote women participation in leadership and all decision making processes. On last but not least, it is also strengthening the gender responsive strategies in crisis, for example, as to how in terms of crisis or natural disaster, we can provide more precise help and also assistance in terms of social subsidy, for example, or any other kinds of affirmative policy that relevant to women needs, for example, as to how we can provide parental leave for these women, for example, or the needs that these women uh, really needs in the first place. But I think aside from those multilateral approach that is coming from UNDP or coming from the World Bank, that is generally based on the data, based on the characteristic, based on the issue of women in the whole entire world. But I think we have to be specific here. We have to understand more deeper about how we understand the school of thought in achieving gender equality, especially in Indonesia. Because in Indonesia, I think we have to be more subtle. We have to be more strategic in achieving this. So we cannot simply utilize those kinds of school of thought coming from the multilateral agency, but we have to use our cultural and local approaches in achieving quality, especially in Indonesia. For example, we have to notice that we have to also address the cultural constraint for gender equality. For example, the problems of Asian family, when women or girls as a collateral of their parents' loan, for example. So if their parents, for example, this is really happening in rural areas, and most of them are farmers. If those farmers really fail to pay the loan, for example, they have to make their girls and kids as the collateral of it, to marry with the boss, for example, to marry with the tangkulak, for example. And this is really happening. The best case study is really happening in Pamengpeuk. There are a certain amounts of village that these practices is absolutely grounded, and it has become the cultural norm there. So I think that we have to be more aware about the situation that's really happening around us. Or in other case, for example, in Asian family, in Chinese family, for example, when girls need to take care over their parents, need to take care of the stay at home, need to take care of their kelontongan, for example, or in any other places as to how women underage, they are just entering elementary school but they are already married to begin with. I think this is really happening in current situation. But I'd like to spotlight this is very interesting topic, like how indigenous approaches that's really happening in Suku Molo when Mama Aleta fights against a fossil mining company by using a certain small movement or demonstration that doing tanun without using clothes and in order to fight against those kinds of mining. And now Mama Aleta parliament and get more power. I think those kinds of unique and also local approach needs to be comprehended in order to achieve gender equality in Indonesia. Can you proceed to the next slide? So several best case study that we can as to how we create innovation and solution that based on these best practices. For example, there is women-led startup that focus as to math education, as to how women can get better access to data analysis program that is really important in the current world, for example, because the growing startup and emerging kind of technological company that demand more technician, demand more able and also qualify in data analysis and math processes. And I think this is, or in Indonesia, for example, can you proceed to the next slide? There are certain amounts of platform or a movement that already wrote, and this is specifically to address the problems of gender inequality, like how Amarta that give a loan for specifically for women with a fair credit scoring, so that women, even though they have no asset, they can have more financial assistance to start a business, for example, or how Fema in STEM. Fema in STEM is a youth-led company that focuses on how to proliferate the idea of women participation in STEM. How, for example, women can be much more able to understand math and technology, because this provides multiple amounts of benefit for women. Aside from more better wage and revenue gain that they have from the tech company or from STEM field, but they also can manage to have a patent that is really important for the revenue gain. And also, I think that due to recent context, when the growing of technological advancement needs this kinds of human capital, it is strategic for us to force women to enter these kinds of field. Or we have Malala Fund as to how a certain someone amounts of company or philanthropy that help women fund them. Or this is my own socialpreneur. There's a say I with my friend initiated a movement called Kembang Desa that's specifically focused as to how it really empower women and girls in rural areas to get better access to starting their businesses and also better access to their capacity building. We provide bootcamp processes, mentoring program, for example, or building a growth center that focus on how women can start their businesses, create something that is really important for their revenue gain. I think those kinds of practices really important as to how we can have a certain amount of insight in order to create a solution in addressing those kinds of problems that are already brought. Because I think it is really important. If we truly proliferate it, if we truly well aware about the problem that's really happening, it is our mandatory, it is our obligation to really address those problems because we truly well informed about this problem. It is our this is the principle that is grounded in my life. So I think you can also use the STEM energy as to how we can create solution and helping more and more people, especially women, to get better self-acceptance. And lastly, you can see there are certain amounts of example. Women can get better position. Women, but the problem is those kinds of example mostly happen or so how we actually focus on how, for example, we can support women in rural areas to also have the same access as what the people and women in urban areas get. Go. For example, there is a Diaroro that become a representative in parliament. There's Gita Shahrani that led the community called Kabupaten Lestari or the Afutami with Think Policy ID and is now working in Vote Bank. Or we can see that there is a senior like how Srimul Yani with Ministry of Finance, Jastuti, for example, or Maria Kapangestu as Managing Director of World Bank, or Nika Rahmawati, for example, as the Director of Pertamina. And I think our obligation as to how we put more place of women to have more better position inside the decision-making processes, so that the policy that and also the contributions of women can be much more appreciated, can be much more valued by the society. Therefore, any kinds of problem and any kinds of discrimination or social perception disenfranchised women can happen. Because we have to consider, even though we are as a man, we have to see women as very well. We see our mother, for example. So that said, I hope that all of my substantive is really essential in order to build and flourish more ideas coming to you to create a solution for these gender equality problems. And after this, we can discuss more deeper about how we can actualize all of those ideas into action and how do we comprehend this kind of problem as a source for us to create solution that is works for all. I thank you.
Thank you very much for Imam, and the presentation is really good. And thank you very much for all speakers for their informative and interesting presentation. Now let's continue to discussion session. This session is we open for two question or opinions. For the audience, if you have any question or opinions, please turn on your microphone. Then mention your name. You can also mix it with Indonesian if you want. Are there any question or opinions? You can turn on your microphone.
Oh, can I?
Okay.
Hello, my name is Widi. First of all, I want to thank both of the speakers for the insightful presentation. I want to ask both of your opinion about this problem. Nowadays, I think men are become more aware about this gender equality problem. And what I want to ask is, what is your opinion about women against women when it's supposed to be women support women? I mean, for example, there are some women that feeling superior than others just because she looks fierce or like, tomboy, and maybe she is a career woman, and then uh, she is turned to mocking other women that simply because they think this kind of women are so feminine and weak and like maybe she is a housewife and yeah, that kind of thing. And then there are some women that feeling superior because of that. So I want to know about your opinion about this problem. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Now I will give the time for Kak Ardela and Kak Imam to answer the question.
Imam, do you want to answer first?
You go first.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I think thank you so much, Vidi, for the answer, for the question, for the question. I think you're inspired by Butejo asking that question. Other some women feeling superior compared to others. I think that's a common problem, especially in terms of how we should work together as women to empower other women. I think that's a common problem. Uh, I think it's really a humane thing, a moral thing for us as humans, regardless men or women, to be respectful to one another, uh, to and to not talk behind each other's backs, even though other women might have different opinions than we do. It's okay. Probably they mean best. I think a very direct example from this, I'm in terms of like the women empowerment movement would be in the feminist movement, where there are many different types of feminists who are trying to achieve the same goal but have very different approaches to it. And sometimes they tend to backlash one another and fight against one another when it's really counterproductive towards women empowerment as a whole. Um, I think all women, everyone, regardless men or women, what men or women, uh, could do a little good from more listening, more understanding, and trying to really respect one another. I think that's my opinion. Imam?
I think this is a very interesting question. Um, to me personally, there are two things that I'm going to say. First, why do they feel superior than other? I think that this is the nature of human being, regardless of the gender. There will be more superior than other. So there are lots of cases like primordialism truly grows, not just in terms of individuality, but it's also happening in terms of country. It is also happening in terms of club or football, for example, when you are uh, MU supporters claim that yourself better compared to Manchester City supporters, for example. I think that this is the norms that really exist in the whole aspect. So it's not specifically happening in women. But when it comes to women or any kinds of gender equality issue, what we have to comprehend is about how do we, become more become more inclusive for everyone. So all types of certain amounts of, I call it this outlier or something of a discrepancy in terms of women as to how, for example, what we can do if we are as a community, we have to create more better social discourse. For example, like we are spotlighting what's so good about you or what's so good about others. Because I do believe that everyone have their comparative advantages. For example, you are you're really good at doing math, for example, but you are really bad at managing yourself, for example. Or there are other entity that really, they are really good in terms of using skincare, for example, or having a very good like face or good looking face and other things. But I think as to how we actually manage all of this comparative advantage if we are as a movement to be much more so that we can find the linking point that everyone have the comparative advantage, everyone have the good and bad. But as to how we actually movement, the main focus is not about whether you are more superior than, but as to how we actually solve the problem inside. What's lacking from you, so how to help each other. I think that's the key as to how, and that's how I see the question. Is there any opinion? Because I think this is really interesting topic.
Thank you for Kak Ardela and Kak Imam uh, for yeah, for your opinions and the answer. And maybe the one question again, the last or opinions from the others.
Hello.
Okay.
Okay, hello. Okay, the first time, let me introduce myself. My name is Monica, and I'm sorry because I was late ya. Ya, jadi tadi telat masuknya. Okay. My question is, uh, what do you think about cultures that having a big impact on gender inequality and how to stop them gitu? And how do we respond to this?
Okay, thank you
Yeah,
for
just it. Thank you.
Monica for the question. Maybe Kak Imam or Kak Ardela want- wanna
Imam, maybe you
answer.
go first this time.
Okay, I think this is a very interesting topic. The problem with culture, I think it is not built in a night. It is a long-term process of past trajectories that is really happening. And up to now, these kinds of culture, these kinds of acquisition, these kinds of socialization, and these kinds of perceptions toward women already grounded and become settled as an institution, and it's become a structural. As to how we counterbalance all of this culture that is emphasize women, for example, that discriminates women, that give women no access to get better well-payment job, for example, we have to also create a culture. But what kind of culture do we create? I think that it's not that directly and radically against all of this culture, especially in Indonesia. We have to be more subtle. That is to say, starting from a very specific actors that we can, for example, if we are as a student, for example, at least we have better rationale as to how we comprehend information and create a decision-making process. So these kinds of actors really important as to how we can use this student as an opinion leader, for example, to share and also to proliferate the idea and the new culture that really benefiting women, for example. They can become an agent, for example, in their home. They can explain if their mother, their mom, for example, being harassed by other actors or by his father, for example. They can try to advocate all of these issues. But second of all, I think in the vast major complexity, we have to create a policy. So we have RUU PKS now. So I think this is really problematic as to how Indonesian people are not aware and are not well informed about the importance of this RUU PKS. But I think this bills really important as to how become the entry point to create other culture that is much more for women. That is so as to how we can support as a student, for example, as civic-minded people, to support this bill to be passed in the parliament, for example, so that this bill can create at least the foundation to create a culture to become a ground slack for our movement, for example. So we have a legitimacy in terms of advocating for the women issue, for example. We have a foundation in shaping more policy and more culture just supporting women. So I think that's the things that we can do to support RUPKS.
Very subtle there, Imam. Okay. Thank you, Monica, for the question. I do agree with Imam. This is a very context-heavy question in terms of every country has their own different cultures. Maybe among Western countries is pretty much homogenous in terms of ideologies and cultures, um, but the cultures are a huge part of our lives, especially in Asian countries, and they're all very, very different. I think culture shouldn't be seen as a setback. It should be seen as a tool to approach women in a very subtle way, to approach women in a much more friendlier way, and trying to advocate for women's rights. The women's rights movements, starting from the suffrage movement where women are allowed to vote, have been thriving since so long, and how we get to this point where we are all able to study without worry. We're all able to at least get some opportunities in economic fields. Uh, it has been a very long process, and it has countered many, many um, cultural backlash. But regardless, it should be taken to our advantage. For example, if we take Kartini Day, for example, where it could be utilized for the advantages of how we should promote for women's rights, not as one who wears the kabaya and are staying at home, but one who is strong and independent and willing to fight um, against the stigma of how a woman should be in society today. I think that's an example of how we can utilize cultures to advocate for women's rights, specifically in Indonesia. Other countries probably have different cultures and different ways to approach them. It would be a more strategic way to approach women's rights, especially since in some countries can be a little taboo, can be a little controversial. So it's a safe game actually. But of course, not all cultures are good. Not all cultures are good. Back then, it was a culture for women to uh, really do nothing but listen to her husband. Now not so much. So that's a proof that we can progress. That's a proof that change can happen. So women's rights movements should not stop here. It should always continue to progress and take whatever strategies that seem most beneficial. I think that's it for me.
Thank you for the answer. And maybe the one question again or opinion, others or
Check.
okay.
Can I ask question, MC? Okay. First of
Yes, you
all,
can.
Okay. First of all, I'm Rifai. Thank you for Kak Adela or Kak Imam for such informative presentation. I just want to ask a question about sometimes I do not understand what the difference is between gender equity or gender equality and women empowerment. Could you please tell me the differences between them, or are they all just the same things? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Maybe Kak Ardela and Kak Imam to answer this question.
Who'd like to go first? Okay, all right. I'll go first. So, this is a very common confusion by people, I think. It's also studied in sociology umum in our first year, in regards to the differences between gender equity and gender equality. So Imam, as SKPM student, please correct me if I'm wrong, but gender equity is the process of being fair to women and men, while gender equality, it does not mean that women and men should be exactly alike, but they should have equal access to every single opportunity in their life. So where it's not constrained by their gender or their sex in here, whether they're male or female, they should have every single opportunity, equal opportunity to achieve whatever they want in life. That is gender equality, while gender equity is the process of being fair to women and men. In terms of women empowerment, um, it's a purpose. Yeah, it's a purpose. It's a way on how um, we can gather women and we can promote and advocate to them how women's rights should be upheld. For example, education rights, for example, economic opportunities, uh, because back then women are very much unequal and inferior to men. So now we want to gather them and make them rise again, and how they are able to really do whatever they want and really achieve anything they want in life, and it should not be withheld by their gender. So that's what women empowerment is about. It's really just giving equal opportunities as much as possible to women out there who haven't had the chance to do so because of how men are so dominant in our lives in terms of patriarchy and misogyny. So I think that's it. So maybe Imam can add more to this.
Um, I think it's already enough said about the terms of gender equality and equity, but I'd like to spotlight the women empowerment processes, why this is really occurs, why this is much. And also, I would like to talk several things about how do we proceed women empowerment, especially in Indonesia, especially in rural areas. I think that women empowerment is derivative values and the derivative approach to achieve gender equality. That is to say, we have to consider that women are unequal, so there is imbalance of power. Men are more powerful in terms of access, in terms of anything that is really happening in social system. So in order for them to be equal, we have to rise up the power of women by women empowerment. But what kind of women empowerment do we need as Indonesian people, especially in rural areas, for example? I think that it is important to empower women through any kinds of channel, especially in terms of culture, especially in terms of social discourses happening. For example, in terms of culture, you see that the wayang performance, all the actors that is really powerful, that is really strong and also have significant impact to the life is man. But how do we change, for example, those kinds of actors by imposing women as a strong figures, like what happened in Marvel, for example, when they introduced Captain Marvel as a counter proposal against the Captain America. Now Captain America already gone, and Marvel already gained much more support and power. So this is also happening to women empowerment in Indonesia, as to how, for example, we actually flip the narrative that actually exists in rural areas, for example. Or second of all, I think that the reason why there are lots of backlash to women empowerment program because men being threatened by women become more empowered because women can take over, and now lots of women get more C-level jobs in terms of management and get well-payment job and doing more better job in terms of data analysis, in terms of managing the company, for example, or even in creating a research. Like we see that lots of our lecturer in IPB, for example, most of them who are really have good achievement, they are women, and we have to consider. So how we create a program and a solution that women empowerment also benefit men. But what kinds of benefit do we share to men? It is based on the movement and based on the program that you want to create. But I think as it is as simple as if women, so if you marry women, for example, that will have more good payment job, so men are not too rush to run their job because they can maintain all of this. Or for example, as to how other approaches that can be done that's really benefiting men to begin with, for example. Because when women earn more payment job, for example, they can distribute and use those kinds of money not for the benefiting of themselves, but for the domestic needs, for the good facility of their children, for example, a good access of their children, so that the children can be much more better in terms of doing the job, for example. I think those kinds of things that we need to proliferate to society, and we have to make all men are aware. So I hope that all men here already, understands about this term, and we can work together in achieving gender equality. So that's for me.
Thank you for Kak Imam and Kak Ardela for the answer. Hopefully, this hopefully with the discussion session we can change our view about gender equality. Ladies and gentlemen, finally we have come to the end of our discussion. I would like to say thanks again to the audience for your activity participation. Hopefully the discussion will be remarkable and helpful for you all. Don't forget to fill the presency link in ipb.link slash you can see on the screen. ipb.link presency FGD 4. Yeah. And now we get to the last session in this FGD, that is closing. This time I would like to say thanks again for all the speakers for their informative and interesting presentation, and to the audience for your active participation. I would like to apologize for any mistake and mispronunciation during the event. And again, don't forget to fill the presency link in ipb.link slash presency FGD 4. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kak.
Thank you, Ardela and Imam. Thank you all.